Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, The Business of Selling to Schools. We appreciate your taking a break from your busy day to join us. Before we start the program, I'll review just a few quick housekeeping items. We're going to be covering a lot of information today about the education market and how to maximize your sales and marketing efforts, but we will leave time at the end of the presentation for questions. You can go ahead and send in your questions as they come up for you throughout the presentation, and we'll put them in the queue to be answered at the end. To send a question, simply click on the Questions tab on your control panel, type your question into the top box, and then click on the Send button. We'll get it, and as I said, we'll put it in the queue to be answered at the Q&A period at the end. If you have any technical difficulties during the presentation, please use that same question feature to get our attention, and we'll do our best to resolve the problem for you. We will be providing you with a recording of the webinar and a copy of the PowerPoint slides. Again, there's a lot of data and charts and graphs and good stuff that you're going to see today. Don't worry too much about taking screenshots and taking notes. You'll get a copy of the PowerPoint and that recording by email, probably tomorrow morning, so keep an eye on your inbox for that. We'll also be posting the materials to the Agile website at agile-ed.com. So if you miss that email or it ends up in your spam box, take a look on the website and you'll be able to access them there as well. Now let's get started. I'm pleased to introduce our speakers today, Verlan Stevens and Scott Brooks. As Agile Education Marketing CIO and Managing Partner, Verlan Stevens specializes in helping companies use data to better understand the specific traits and nuances around education, and then use that information to drive decision-making that produces successful results with educators. Verlan has developed this unique expertise over more than 30 years spent compiling, managing, and analyzing large information databases. After graduating with a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics with an emphasis in computer science from Boise State University, Verlan went on to hold senior management positions, including Director of Information Technology and Database Compilation for Quality Education Data, Vice President of Development of CodeCorrect, and Director of Information Technology for the Arabian Horse Registry of America. He also serves as Director of Information Systems at Health Decisions International and Director of Operations and Product Management at IHS Health Information. Verlan uses his passion and expertise in data trending and market intelligence to spearhead Agile's data compilation efforts and to guide customers in their sales and marketing efforts to educators. Verlan is joined today by Scott Brooks, who is Vice President of Corporate Development for Agile. Scott has more than 25 years of experience in a variety of corporate and business development leadership positions, including Vice President of Corporate Business Development at Critigen and Managing Director at Verlan. He also has experience building software and services organizations from the ground up. As an entrepreneur, he launched and sold a successful software company to IBM, built and ran software and services practices, and served as a key member of leadership for several tech data companies. Scott earned his degree in Computer and Information Sciences and Support from Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. We're excited to have Verlan and Scott with us today and are excited to dive into the data that they've got to share. So I'm going to go ahead and hand the program over to Scott now.
Well, thank you very much, Emily, and thank you for that introduction. We're going to start off by talking about, the education market information. Today, we're going to talk about market intelligence. We're going to talk about the purchasing life cycle and so on. And first of all, I want to say, why do you even really care about this? And really, it's about the marketing to the right educator at the right time with the right content. And understanding the school year buy cycle and what educators are looking for when they're looking for it is essential when marketing to K-12. You can use this kind of information in various areas to build and grow your business. Using up-to-date market information helps you build better business plans and product plans. It helps you determine if you even have a viable market for your product or service. Using this to develop better products and realistic business plans can really help you build a company that educators trust. And then secondly, knowing the segment you're marketing to allows you to be more specific and innovative in your offerings and your messaging, and allows you to craft your marketing to capture the attention of the right people at the right time. And then your marketing team can use the same information to target messaging and content more thoughtfully, because really the days of mass mailing and general messaging are over. We're going to cover how marketing can use this information to personalize content across channels, districts, and educators and improve your marketing ROI. And as I'm sure you're well aware, the decision-making process and buying cycle in this market is very unique from others. So we'll talk a little bit about the process and how we can navigate through it. And then thirdly, when your sales reps reach out, you want to make sure that they have a substantive conversation with these people, because it takes time to get someone on the phone and respond to email or posts during a sales cycle. And you don't want your sales reps to just get that far along to simply ask a superintendent, hey, tell me about your district. By understanding what's most important to the person in the specific district that they're in at the specific time, reps can build a stronger, lasting relationship. So on the next slide, we're going to start, I thought I would start off mostly with a few interesting facts about the education sector. And the first one is that decision-making and purchasing is a group activity. Most schools and district purchase decision-makings are made collaboratively by groups of educators. This means that you can't just target one title in a district, or even if that job title is the one who signs your purchase orders. It's important to understand all of the players who need to be involved and what roles that they play. For instance, for an online literacy program, you'll potentially need to reach out to curriculum directors, technology directors, and literacy specialists at the district level. Depending on the size of the district, you may also want to include superintendents and assistant superintendents. Now, librarians, principals, assistant principals, technology coordinators, and lead teachers are also important to include at the school level. Each of these job titles has different needs and questions, so each of their perspectives should be addressed specifically in your marketing communications. And to back that up, for example, here is a group of people that are involved in decision-making for an EdTech purchase. There's lots of different people that play a part in purchasing your product, from the IT and curriculum directors to the media specialists and teachers. Make sure you know who you are messaging, what each of these people are looking for, and when they want to hear your message. Now, interesting fact too is that the length of time it takes to make a purchase decision is fairly consistent across all product categories. However, purchasing decisions are rarely made quickly. More than half of the schools, over 52%, take between 1 and 6 months to make purchasing decisions, with less than 40% taken between 1 to 3 months. Now, interesting fact 3 is the majority of schools, almost 60%, finalize their budget in Q2, April, May, and June of each year. That means they've decided what products that they'll purchase, but the actual purchases most likely won't occur until the summer, where 60 to 70% of purchases occur between late May and late August. So now let's go on to the overall purchasing life cycle. Now, we all know that K-12 education is an exciting market, but depending on the product or service you're selling, the purchasing cycle can be a little bit bewildering and often frustrating. And paving the way for a smooth sales process starts with tailoring your marketing communications to provide what educators need at each stage of the decision-making process. And in K-12, timing is essential. You must connect with educators at the right time. You want to understand when, how, and to whom to market throughout the year. So to optimize this K-12 buy cycle, we look at it as 3 stages, and that lead towards the purchase decision: planning, awareness and familiarity, and consideration and trial, and then hopefully that rolls into a purchase. And I'm going to go into each of these in a little bit more detail as we go over it. But a quick overview now is that May, June, and July is when we basically create the plans within the education sector. And then August through December, you're building awareness and familiarity. They want to know, start to learn who you are. This is a company and product level branding effort on your part. It answers questions like, who are you? What are your products? And why should I care? And then January through April is when K-12 starts to express their interest and they want to see a little bit more about your product and maybe even kick into a trial. And then in early summer is now when they're interested in purchasing. They pass it to the purchasing department and they want to actually have your product purchased and ready to go for the start of the school year. Now, this is a 12-month cycle that we're looking at here. It's really a 9 months consideration into purchasing in the summer. Most products can fit within this, but you'll find that some more complex might take a little bit longer. You'll have to maybe tack on a few more months on the awareness phase and other phases throughout this, but the key is the consideration and trial phase from January to April tends to be fairly locked in stone based on the annual school year for the educators as well. And then if your product is kind of supplementary or discretionary spending, you can basically be putting a quote buy now message out there pretty much throughout the entire year. So if we go to the first phase, planning, this is where you create a plan, and you should be creating plans every year. And this really happens and focuses through the months of May through July. And this is when educators assess their needs and do their research. Even though students are gone for the summer, school and district administrators are still hard at work. This makes summer a good time to connect with these decision makers whose time is at a premium when they're in the school session. So while classroom teachers certainly have lighter schedules in the summer, they still are using their time out of the classroom for activities like professional learning and lessons planning. They're also researching new products and programs to support their teaching. Now, to maximize the planning months, you want to scale back your marketing just a little bit in the summer, but it's important to stay in communication with them, even if it's on a less frequent basis. You can optimize your website for your target keywords. As educators evaluate the previous school year and assess their plans for the coming year, they're likely to head to the internet to find answers, ideas, and solutions. So make sure your website pops up on page 1 or 2 of the search engines for the keywords and phrases most relevant to the challenges your product solves for the educators. And then also share evaluation tools and planning guides, because your SEO may get them there, but you have to have the content and answers to help keep them there. So you could have rubrics, planning guides, articles that detail how strategies are implemented and what results are the kind of content educators are looking for during the summer months. You can also share it over email and social media as well. And feel free to even host some webinars because educators have a little bit more free time to attend those. So that's the planning phase. So now when we jump to the awareness and familiarity phase, by the time the doors open in August, all major purchases for the new school year have been made. So it's time to start guiding the educators on their journey towards their next buying season. The types of questions that you want to have them be able to answer is, who are you? Why should I care? How are you different? And how can you ease my considerable burden? So leads are basically what you're really looking for during this period. So you want to focus your marketing tactics on top of the lead funnel generation. Email continues to be one of the best ways to generate and nurture leads. During this time of year, you can use email to share newsletters and content like case studies, white papers, and videos that showcase what your product does and why it's better than other solutions and competitors. Direct mail can make your organization stand out from the crowd. Believe it or not, it's still actually coming on as a resurgence now, and printed material are kept longer than emails or other materials downloaded from a website, so it has longer shelf life. And then webinars, workshops, and conferences can all be a big lead generator and are highly effective ways to introduce your company and start conversations with educators. You can reach a wide national audience with webinars and also use recorded webinars for ongoing leads gen on your website. And workshops, conferences may be more localized than webinars, but nothing is more powerful than that face-to-face meeting. And then put yourself in the spotlight as well. Use social media. It's a perfect way to, it's a perfect marketing channel to share content and help educators to get to know your organization. And you could even start to use PR at this point to showcase the successes of your current clients, because they want to know how it's going to fix their burdens, how it's going to benefit them. And the fall is also a really great time to sell directly to classroom teachers, particularly products like classroom decorations, supplemental materials such as workbooks, flashcards, apps, classroom supplies, and so on, because teachers spend on average $490 of their own money on their classroom themselves. So it's definitely an opportunity for you to capture some of those funds as well. So from the awareness phase, we want to roll into what's the consideration and trial. So by now they've gotten a really good feel for your product, your brand awareness has done very well, your calls to action at that time were learn more, find out a little bit more. Now you want to get to a point where more than half of the schools finalize their budgets in April, May, and June. So this means really that the start of the calendar year is an important time to be in front of the educators. They can't budget for your products if they don't know about them. So that awareness and familiarity phase is critical. And now we want to give them information they need to make decisions. When educators research solutions for their classrooms and schools or districts, there's a specific information they're looking for, as you can see here in the slide. And when crafting your spring marketing campaigns, make sure you're making it easy for educators to make informed decisions by proactively providing the information that they need. The marketing channels that tend to work the best at this time of year are email, as always. Continue sending those emails in the spring, but you might want to shift your focus from providing overview information and inviting people to learn to delivering strong information around efficacy and results. Push for demos and product trials in your calls to action. Make sure you're staying in touch with all the leads you generate in the fall. Spring is the time to move them forward in the decision-making process. If you use content marketing to generate leads, start to send more product-focused information and less general content. Get people excited about the product and what it can do for them. Direct mail works great here as well. Depending on what you're selling, spring is a great time to send catalogs and product samples. And educators still rely on and share catalogs even in the digital age. And webinars, workshops, and conferences, spring is a great time to put your customers to work for you and list them to share your product is working, how your product is working and being used. Educators want to know that your solution has worked for classrooms, schools, and districts that are similar to their own. Testimonials, this is the time to use them. Invite your customers to present during a webinar or at a conference. And then keep your visibility high again. Put your customers to work writing blogs, articles you can share with the education media and across your social media channels, showcasing how your product is working and what kinds of environments it's working in. And part of that consideration trial on the next slide would be, what are people actually going to respond to? So you need to know who you are communicating with and when. And you'll see that it's not a one-size-fits-all. So we drill down in here a little bit more. And one thing Agile that we're constantly doing is gathering information and developing tools and solutions to help marketers understand the education market. And we gather it at the district, the school administrator, and teacher level through various means, including performing regular surveys similar to this one. Recently, we asked educators, what do you really want to know from vendors about their product or service? And then you, as marketing and salespeople, not only have to understand the market, who's in it, the role they play, the part that they play in decision-making, and when to connect with them depending on which district size that they're in. But at the end of the day, it really gets down to who has used this product and did it work? How is it going to solve my problem or problems? And partially, how am I going to pay for this? And principals are less interested in features than they are about how is this going to make my life better and who's already used this to make it, to show some testimonials. And if you think about it, in the types of marketing we're talking about, you only really have a few seconds to get their attention and make sure you're hitting them with something that they actually care about. And then now that once you've gone through all of this, then boom, you're at the summer, you're at the very end, you're at the purchasing side of it. In the next slide. And summer is the best time of year, and not just because it's like sunshine and long days, but summer is when 60 to 70% of purchases are made in the school market. And it's summertime when all of your hard work generating and nurturing leads over the previous 9 months starts to pay off. So hopefully at this point, congratulations, you made a sale, and now we can convert into what really feeds into this from an information standpoint. So we've talked mostly about the buy cycle and the timing right now. Now we want to get into the information, intelligence, and demographic side of it. So this is when I'll pass it over to Verlan.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate the passover and the intro part of this particular presentation. So we all know the U.S. education market tends to be a somewhat fragmented market between the schools, the districts, charter schools, early childhood centers, and it's really a matter of starting to break that down into manageable pieces and really understand the characteristics of who you're talking to and who you're trying to talk to, what they're interested in, and be able to group those down and have appropriate messages. As Scott said, it's so important to identify the right educator, the right time, and with the right message so that your marketing efforts are effective, leading to that sales cycle in the summer months. We can see here we've got over 16,000 school districts, 150,000 schools, and in total, we see a huge amount of churn in that marketplace. I think we see an annual churn rate of over 20%. I was just reading an article yesterday on a local school district here in Colorado of Harrison, and they're seeing this year a 26% turnover in their overall staff. 26% of their teaching staff, their superintendent has left. They're just seeing a massive kind of churn. And we certainly see overall in our file, that's on a bit certainly on the high side, but there is a fairly constant, fairly high rate of change. On the K-12 side, we see more than 1 million educators come on each year and 1 million educators leave. It's a very dynamic space. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what the districts really look like. We recently kind of broke down the districts and really started to segment and look at them a bit differently, from the largest mega districts at 100,000 students down to the smallest at 1,500 students and below. And some of those are clear down to 50, 60 students. So the diversity of this market in terms of the size of these organizations is fairly dramatic, as well as the kind of numbers that fall within each one of those. If we look at the mega districts, there's really a very small number of them. I was even surprised myself when I pulled the numbers for this, that there are only 30 of these districts in the country that have more than 100,000 students. On average, it's right around 200,000 students. They have 12,000 teachers, 300 schools, and their average budget exceeds $2 billion. These are the Dallas, Chicago, LA Unified type of districts. They're a very challenging group to be able to sell to. Almost always takes a direct sales team that has the ability to get in, interact with the right people. They are characterized by large committees of lots of different people. The stakeholders are across a large group and typically take a long time for them to make decisions and gather information. For this group, communication is varied. Email, social, digital and web advertising, your website, direct mail can be a possibility. So there's really, these guys are going to be a particularly challenging group and take it's a long sales cycle with a significant investment in terms of to be able to reach into those schools and districts. The next group is what we characterize as a large district. more than 10,000 students, and 924 in the country fall into this category. On average, about 25,000 students, 1,500 teachers, 35 schools. They're an order of magnitude smaller than our first group. So where the first group was over 2 billion, these have 245 million in terms of average budget. So, where things scale down, but we're talking about a much larger group here. Instead of the 30 we had initially, we've got 924 in this group to work with, and starting to understand what those districts look like, how they make decisions. We still have, committee level purchasing, and there's going to be teams of people analyzing, looking at, making these kind of decisions. And so still the kind of reach out is very similar to the large ones in terms of the overall channels we're utilizing and how we're reaching out to those. But these will be characterized with quicker decision making than the very largest districts, smaller numbers of people being involved, less stakeholders, fewer number of schools being impacted with the purchasing decisions. Our next group is our medium districts. So 4 to 10,000, average 6,000 students, 10 schools in the district, almost 500 teachers. Now we're down to a $75 million budget, but we're up in terms of numbers to 1,600, almost 1,700 districts that fall into this category. They start to have those common characteristics. These, are characterized, if we look at districts like a Flagstaff or a Barstow Unified in California. So nice medium-sized districts where it's easier to connect with the right people because there's just so many fewer in the organization. When we're only talking the entire district having under 500 teachers, if we look at the ratio of 10 schools, we only have 10 principals we're reaching out to. So the scale starts to come down and become much more manageable in terms of understanding who they are and what their needs are. Our next group, small to medium-sized districts, our numbers keep jumping. Those with more than 1,500 students, we've got 3,300 of those. 5 schools on average, $31 million annual budget. So continues to scale and up in terms of numbers of available, down in terms of number of people we're having to interact and understand what's going on. And the smallest group, those with less than 1,500 students, represents over 10,000 of the 16,000 school districts fall into this category. They have an average of only 2 schools, 56 teachers, and an average budget of just under $10 million. So the large number here, one of the things that really characterizes these small districts is the large number of hats that are being worn. We've got 2 schools. In terms of real administrative level people, we probably have a superintendent and 2 principals. And so we're really dealing with a very small group of high-level decision makers, and they're each wearing multiple hats. Either one of the principals is taking on, maybe the elementary principal also manages all their elementary curriculum, or the superintendent takes on curriculum for secondary. Understanding their additional roles and things that they're doing is important, but we're communicating now with, we don't have the large committees we had in the other one, but we still have distributed decision making, but on a much smaller scale than we did. These districts have the ability to make much quicker decisions and move more quickly than the larger districts. If we look next at how decisions are made, we saw some of the earlier pieces around what's important, but I think again, one of the piece I liked on this one was really around aligning with the need. That's the number one factor in terms of buying decisions, is understanding what their needs are. And the schools are pretty explicit in terms of producing that. We know all kinds of information in this market, from the number of ELL type students, the number of Title I students, the ethnicity mix. We understand huge amounts of information on student performance and on a particular school. Is this school performing well, in the middle, or are they a struggling school? And so we have a huge amount of information that we can really understand the particular school and what their needs are. And we can make sure that as we're marketing and reaching out, that we're putting out the right message to the right group. There's no reason to put out a message about struggling students to a very high-performing school. That's not their number one challenge. You have to make sure that when you're reaching out, you understand the needs of the district and the school, and you're aligning to that and making sure that that's what's going to get you the response that you're looking for, is having that right message. You know, the other side. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Back up one if you would. I have one more comment there. The other thing is the factor most likely to turn off a vendor, off people to a vendor. Excuse me. Offers that aren't relevant to my job. You know, it just, again, you got to understand your audience, or you're actually damaging your brand reputation by putting out irrelevant messaging to a particular person. So part of it is, you know, really starting to understand more and more about what are districts thinking about, what are they talking about. And several years ago, we developed our EdIntel product, where we're going out and gathering, you know, large amounts of information about schools and districts and what they're actually talking about. We built our own data mining capability to go out, gather this information, and this will be one of the first times where we really started to look at the trending in those areas and what that looks like in terms of what are people talking about and how frequently. Next slide, please. So when we look at that, it was really interesting to see. I took the information we had starting in 2016 and our current information from 2018. Our EdIntel data is updated constantly. So we're constantly out gathering this information because of the large number of districts and schools that we're gathering this information from. It takes us about 60 days to make the entire circuit each time. So this information is constantly changing. There's always new information being added. And when we look, we can see things that are, you know, most things have trended up, if we will. And the biggest gains are in areas like STEM. You know, 2 years ago, we had about 4,500 districts talking about STEM. We now are over 8,000 districts that are talking about STEM and the STEM activities in their district. Project-based learning has been a big gainer. We went from around 3,500 districts talking about that to over 6,000 districts now focused on project-based learning. Blended learning, another big gain. You know, we went from just 2 years ago, only 2,500 districts, now well over 4,500 districts that are focused in talking about blended learning and the opportunities that presents for their clients, or for their students. The next one is flipped learning. Whoops, I'm sorry, not quite. Flipped learning, flipped has continued to gain, but not at quite the same rate that some of the others are. Online learning has gained, but very steady. Competency-based learning has been pretty flat, and that term in particular is used in certain states very heavily, but not necessarily universally across. But by understanding not only the trend information and what's important and what are people more and more talking about, but we can also drill down very specifically to exactly what districts are talking about these particular topics. So when you go in, you can start the conversation knowing that they already have blended learning in place, or they already have competency-based or project-based learning. And so you can start the conversation knowing more about the district and, hey, maybe you should try this thing. You know what phase they're in terms of their evaluation and discussion. Next. We also look at things like particular devices. So we can see that iPads, 2 years ago, a little over 8,000 districts had specific discussion around iPads. Now it's over 12,000. So that has continued to climb, and the fact that 12,000 out of the 16,000 districts have discussion of iPad on their websites, That's pretty interesting to me. I was really surprised that the numbers were continued to be that strong. Chromebook went from right around 4,000 to 8,000, so they've doubled in the last 2 years. One-to-one has continued to overall to climb steadily. So gone from 4,000 to 7,500, a little over 7,500. And again, it's important when you're approaching with a particular product, knowing what the environment is. What platform are they running on? Do they have the one-to-one? Do they have the bandwidth necessary to support the product? There's no reason going out and chasing after schools that don't have the technology to support a particular product. Focus your efforts on those that really do have the underlying capabilities. Changing a little bit, we're going to move on into kind of a different areas. How do our educators gather information? It was interesting, a survey we did, that word of mouth continues to be the most dominant method that educators gather information. They talk to other educators, followed by email. So the reason our email has continued to be, a strong performer is that's where where a majority of educators continue to get solid information. But there are also conferences, webinars, publications. They gather information from a large number of areas, and it's important in your marketing efforts to continue to make sure that wherever that educator is reaching out, that you have the information for them. The second one is purchases heavily influenced by another educator sending on a link. So, you do see that that is a prime factor in copying others that they think will be interested in a particular topic. One of the things that's really changed with the whole word of mouth is you now have an opportunity to listen into that. So social media has really given us the opportunity to listen into the word of mouth. So when an educator reaches out to their group of friends or their group of coworkers or other people they respect, you have the ability now to listen in on that conversation. You get to eavesdrop and see what's being said and how's it being said. Overall, educators, 71% of educators indicate they're on Facebook. General population, 55%. They're overrepresented. They are social by their very nature. They interact with other people. That's what they do professionally, and it's not surprisingly that that's also part of how they interact on a personal level. 35% are on Pinterest, 15% on Twitter. Again, they overrepresent the general population in terms of that particular area. On the right-hand side here, we can see that, on an hourly basis, we see, following the EdTech hashtag on Twitter, there's 183 tweets in an hour on EdTech. The overall audience, 3.25 million people, 55 retweets an hour, tweets with images, 22%. And so there's a lot of that information being shared, and you have that great ability to listen in and see what's being talked about, how it's being talked about. And we all know, when we look at the overall traffic, if you will, on Twitter, of the 500 million tweets every day, 4.2 million are related to education. That's a lot. Nearly 10% of the total traffic on Twitter is around education. It's a powerful area to be able to monitor and see what's being talked about, how it's being talked about, and ultimately actually engage with these people, not only monitoring, but being part of the conversation. So how do you leverage that word of mouth conversation? It's through the use of social currency. People want to have access to share content that's relevant, that they can retweet or they can send on, they can read and they can share with others. So it's important to put your content into a means that allows you to not only collect the names of who are the influencers, but actually work with them to identify their problems, solve it, promote a solution, and easily share those solutions. Not only listen, become part of the conversation. It's the first time that vendors probably are really part of that word of mouth and being able to understand what's going on there and interact with the particular audiences. So how can you understand what's going on? There's tools out there that allow you to, like TweetDeck, where you can see all the tweets on various particular topics, and you can kind of have it running and follow what's going on, and you can see what's going on in future ready or blended learning topics and follow the particular hashtags. It's a great way to just kind of see what educators are talking about, what they're asking about. You can also take transcripts and use those to create things like a word cloud. We can see on our next screen where we've actually been able to take a particular transcript, run it into word cloud, and we can see here are particular things that are being talked about, and you can then use that to identify what's going on. But in the end, it's really around building relationships. We know that for educators, relationships matter. They say that building relationships is easier and more effective in reasonable size classes, but really it's about building relationships. And ultimately, that's what you want to do with these educators, is build relationships with them like the relationships they're building with their students. As we wrap up, we've talked about when, where, why, and some of the how. Buying cycle can be lengthy. We know virtually all these cycles, it's a full annual cycle, some pieces more, some pieces less, but it's a real cycle, and it's important to know kind of from your calendar where you're at in that cycle. Different districts require different selling approaches. Understand who you're talking to. I was on an Ed Week seminar about 6 months ago with a superintendent, and his big thing was, and they asked him, so what do you not like when you're interacting with a company? He says, the thing I don't like is them getting on and just saying, tell me about your district. He says, all that says is you didn't do your homework and you don't know who you're talking to. Do your homework ahead of time and know who you're talking to. The last part is this whole market is, I think, fairly unique in that educators really work collaboratively. Decisions are seldom made by one person in the organization. They talk, they communicate, they share. It's important for you to understand that, be in front of those influencers, and use both your current marketing to do that, but also start to tap into what the social offerings are and allow that to give you visibility into what those conversations look like.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Scott and Verlan. Both of you shared a lot of really insightful information and again, lots of data and charts and stats and things for us to chew on and noodle on as we head into that back to school season, as we begin our own planning for those really important outreach to educators throughout the summer and into back to school. So just a reminder to folks before we get to the Q&A that you will get an email tomorrow that includes a link to view the recording of today's webinar and also to download these slides. So you'll have access to all of the stats here that Scott and Verlan shared with us. So guys, if you are ready for some questions, we will dive into those. We've got quite a few, so we'll just get through what we can before our time runs out together. So the first one, we actually got a couple of these of different varieties, but it's around that buying cycle and wanting to know, how does software compare to a physical product on this buying cycle? Is there variation, and what's the impact of the different products on this buying cycle?
All right, well, I'll jump in, and then Verlan, feel free to add your context as well. Everything that we've seen so far is that it's basically standard outside of things like discretionary or complex sales. So it's hard when you're coming from different industries, for example, to understand kind of how regimented the buy cycle is within the education sector. And the main point really is to understand how long it takes for one, and the order of operations that happen within the buy cycle. So because funding generally does get released between May and June, and they're not going to buy anything before that because they just won't have any funds. Now, that doesn't preclude you from getting discretionary funds at the end of the school year, where they have to get rid of their funds before their year starts again. That's fine. You can try and get some of those dollars. But say, for example, if you have a type of a product that's an LMS or something that's a 18 to 24 month sales cycle, obviously it doesn't fit directly within this, but you do want to have this buy cycle in your back pocket to understand when they're going to, for example, start to consider your product for trial, which is January to April. So you definitely want to be focusing all of your efforts, even if it's for 18 months prior to that, of building awareness and familiarity with your product, so that when January hits of the year that you're trying to sell your product, then they would consider it and start jumping into that. The purchasing does tend to still happen in the summertime frame, especially for larger products as well. So depending on the product, it really is, I would say, it's a pretty standard cycle, and you just have to follow where the money is, which does tend to get released sometime in May and June.
Okay, great. That was very helpful. So Verlan, this next question is probably for you, and that is, how much do personnel change throughout the year versus just in the fall with back to school time?
You know, the big numbers in terms of change are around the teachers, and those clearly are very oriented towards the summer months. Most of your teachers turn over during those summer months. There are a few during the year, you know, where a retirement comes up or something, but most of the teachers are pretty committed to a particular calendar year and a group of students, or a particular school year and the group of students there. District administrators, that's just not true at all. We see them turn over, and, you know, there's a large number that turn over in the summer. We see the biggest turnover of superintendents and principals in the summer months, but we see, you know, September, October, November, we see a whole bunch around the calendar year. IT people turn over every month. And so, you know, the districts is a very different thing. Their jobs are not focused on a group of students that they're committed to at that particular school year. And so we see those turnover throughout the year, and we gather that information much more frequently because of that turnover.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. It's definitely a moving target, as you well know, in your data compilation work. So we're a small business and just starting up, and this is kind of a twofold question. Which is the best tier of districts that we should start with in terms of opportunity? And also, what's the best time of year to actually launch our product?
So I'll grab the first one, Scott, if you want to talk about time of year to launch. So without knowing the specifics and things about it, it's hard to say a little bit, but we have a lot of clients that, you know, that are smaller startups particularly, that focus on kind of that small and medium-sized districts and have much better initial success there. That it's a much smaller group of people making decisions. They're much more responsive to being able to get information via an email or another manner and respond to that without large committees and a lot of time. And so in general, we see that. As you start to gather sales, though, one of the things we always recommend is try and analyze who your client base is. So, you know, we use our eProfile product to go in, look at what the profile of your current sales are, so that we can start to say, oh, you're doing great in these medium-sized districts. We can focus efforts in there. We can help you identify who else looks like the people we've had success with. So part of it is start out with, you know, what you think is going to be a reasonable plan to a reasonable group, but then follow who the respondents are. Scott?
Yeah, that's great, because and it makes so much sense. A lot of companies think that they need to go after the large districts, the LA Unified and things like that, and they don't realize just how long the sales cycle is and how collaborative the decision-making process is. So when you start looking at the decision timing of your product and so on, you really have to look at that size of district that Verlan was talking about. So if you're looking at small to medium-sized districts, the timing of trying to go after those, you got to think about when they're going to be doing their planning. They fall right into this purchasing life cycle that we're talking about, this 9 months to purchasing in the summer. So if they've already, depending on when you want to look at when your development efforts are going to be coming up, you want to definitely tie it into that purchasing life cycle if you're looking at the districts, both small to medium size, because they're going to stay within that timeline. And then depending on the type of product you have, you might be able to get a shorter timeline for something like this. Because of those smaller districts, you do tend to have one to a few people making the decision versus a large decision-making committee for some of the larger ones. So it's hard to say specifically for which product, depending on the type of product you have, but I would definitely keep an eye on that May to July timeframe when they're starting to do planning, because then you want to get that they're going to make their purchase for what they're doing. You might be able to capture that if it's a possibility, but you're looking at probably the August to December timeframe is the best time, because that's when they want to start learning about the products that they're going to purchase and trial the next year.
I think the thing to remember though is not to get discouraged with that long cycle and realize it's going to be an extended buying cycle.
Yeah, especially depending on the product, as you had kind of walked us through earlier on in the presentation. Verlan, we had a lot of interest, both from current Agile customers and some folks who are not yet using Agile data, about the EdIntel. So from customers wondering which data fields they would look at to segment out those schools and districts interested in this case, particularly PBL, but any of those variables you showed, and just providing a little more information to those who aren't familiar with EdIntel.
So, EdIntel is 11 different categories of information, and it's sold on a per category basis. So the first one was all around our learning methodologies area. So you get to see exactly what learning methodologies that particular district is utilizing or talking about. So there are other ones around what web platform and what purchasing platforms they're using and lots of other areas. The one I focused on there was learning methodologies, and the information is a number of different data variables around that, and it's bundled together as the learning methodologies portion.
Okay, and certainly folks can reach out to their Agile account executive for more information on EdIntel, and there's also information on the Agile website, which is agile-ed.com, and you can find more details about the different categories that are available and how that information is compiled and can be used. Moving back to the buying cycle, what's the impact of charter and private schools on this buying cycle? How does it differ for them?
It really doesn't differ, because they tend to be along the same timeline, mainly because people are getting in and out of school at a very similar time. I mean, there are definitely some charters that go, and private schools that tend to go through the summer and so on, but it really, the impact is, I would stay pretty in line with it, for sure.
Yeah, just one note there. I agree that the cycle is definitely very similar, but just as Verlan was saying, with those smaller districts where there's not as many people involved in decision making, people tend to have more autonomy. That's also the case with those private and charter schools, so they can certainly be a good place to get in if you're a new company, to start building those sales, as you maybe spend more time trying to get into that purchasing cycle for the larger size districts.
Well, and the willingness to try things. I think that's
exactly.
Very much in the charter kind of realm. There is that willingness to try new things is certainly part of the mentality there.
Yeah, I totally agreed on that. Let's see. So in terms of messaging and your outreach to all the different people who are involved in decision making, how do you not step on toes when you're reaching out to superintendents, assistant superintendents, the curriculum director, all the different stakeholders involved?
At least from my perspective, the important thing is to have the message needs to be appropriate for that audience. So if you're talking to the superintendent, there's a particular message that they're that will resonate with them, that they're looking at. and it's not the same that it is for the educator. I think so I think ultimately the way not to step on it is have the right message for the right person, and by segmenting it up that way, and understand when we're out pitching it, we're not presenting the same message to all people within that organization.
I think it goes back to that knowing your audience that Scott talked about at the beginning in particular. Yeah,
the right message with the right content at the right time. And the content part we didn't harp on too much within this because we were focused more on the cycle time by cycle, but the content is critical depending on who you're sending it to and when you're sending it to them, because you may send something to a teacher at a different time of the month or year than you would to a principal. So that's how that all fits into the mix as well.
All right. In the data that Agile collects, do you have any data on cycle of RFPs what role that plays in the buying cycle?
We don't. We don't tend to gather RFP information. That in general, our feeling is that quite often by the time it goes to RFP, many of the decisions have already been made. They have already identified who the leaders are, who they've gathered information from, and so from our standpoint, much of that work is done ahead of time, and by the time it gets down to RFP level, much of the decision has already been made. So we don't tend to focus much on that particular part of the cycle.
All righty. This is a question outside of K-12, but maybe you can comment on it. Do you have insight into the buying cycle for colleges and universities? Is it similar to what we outlined here for K-12?
It is. We do have some insight into it, and it does not follow a standard model like it does in the K-12 sector. Every college kind of has a different buy cycle of their own. They all have their own budgets. It's definitely something you have to know which college you're talking to and the type of college you're talking to, whether it's a 4-year, 2-year, and so on. Verlan?
I think you hit it. Yeah, they are not the same as K-12.
They definitely are not. It's a different beast and a different webinar on that topic. Yeah. Well, we are getting to the end of our time. We did have some more questions that came in, and we will answer some of those via social media. And then some of you with some very specific questions about marketing tactics and strategies. We'll have someone get back in touch with you individually to address those. So if you've asked a question, don't worry, we will address it once we wrap up the webinar here. And we appreciate everyone's questions and helping to continue the conversation that Scott and Verlan started with us. Really great, fascinating information. And again, I think helpful as we all start to put on our thinking caps and work towards that back to school campaign cycle that we're all heading into. A reminder once again that you will get an email tomorrow with a link to the recording and the slides. So feel free to access those, take notes, and share them with your colleagues. Also, when you log off here in just a few seconds, you will get a survey that pops up, and it's just 5 quick questions, and we do encourage you to answer those questions for us. It'll take you less than a minute, and your feedback will really help us create webinars that are useful to you. We definitely are looking for suggestions for future webinars, so feel free to share those with us. Also, speaking of future webinars, go ahead and mark your calendar for our next one, which is coming up on June 21st. Mike LeClaire, who is Data Quality and Compilation Manager over at Agile, is going to take an even deeper dive into district demographics and walk us through how 2 schools may look exactly the same on paper, but in reality are dealing with very different initiatives and challenges, and how that impacts how you're going to sell and market to them. So that's going to be a really informative webinar as well. So keep an eye out, again, on your email and your social media and on the Agile website for information on how to register for that coming up on June 21st. Thank you again, Scott and Verlan, for taking the time to be with us today and putting together all of this great information. I think it's been helpful to everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much to our audience. We certainly appreciate all their time today.
Great, everyone. Have a good afternoon.